I think of, gosh, there's a lot. Locally, there was a story some years ago, and Bernard Grant, photographer extraordinaire, will remember this. Over in the Park Hill neighborhood, a family was distressed because their 14-year-old son, who was mentally challenged, was just acting out. He had gotten off his meds or something had gone wrong, so they called police for help. And as you can imagine, things got crazy and heated, as they often do in these situations when people have to think quickly. And the young boy was shot and killed. And so that was heartbreaking because obviously the family felt bad, and obviously the police did too. It was just one of those situations where everyone had to think quickly. But what came out of that situation was special training for police officers, Denver police officers, and eventually throughout the metro area to do this critical training around psychology, to be able to identify what it looks like when somebody's having a mental illness breakdown versus becoming violent and threatening their family. And internationally, it always breaks my heart when I'm conflicted. I get on my little plane that's got, two little propellers on it and barely getting off the ground, and I'm grateful to be going home someplace safe, but it breaks my heart when I see people and their sad eyes are just saying, please help. And I promise to come back if I know I am, but I don't always know that I am. But what I do say is I promise I will tell your story. I promise this will not end with me. But that does break my heart.
One of us is going to trip on that, so we'll just kind of catch each other. We've got a little bond there. Okay, I'll catch you, I promise. What do you believe is one of the greatest threats or injustices in the world today?
So as a journalist, I think one of the greatest threats is the fact that more and more journalists, there are more journalists imprisoned around the world today than ever before. And that is frightening. When you think about this democracy or republic, however you want to frame it, we understand what we're talking about. But if journalists can't have the freedom to report and shed a light on corruption, then it all falls apart. And then we're all losers. And so I think that is truly a problem. And I was just as always, doing research and thinking about where we are in this state of mind today. And I think about international news, and let's call it 10 years ago or so, international bureaus were shutting down. It was just too expensive. And then the Rocky Mountain News closed, and other news organizations that in the cities that we've lived in have closed. And you cannot have a full functioning democracy if we're not hearing multiple sides to a story. Thank goodness for at least one paper, but that's one paper is not good for this size of a city. You've got to have at least two papers. I mean, who's doing the real investigative work, the real journalism work? That's why I always get on my soapbox, kind of like I am now, and tell people, support independent journalists and independent news. Again, regardless of what political side, what aisle you are, what side of the aisle you're on politically, because we know there are people who want to tell the good stories. So I think that is a real big problem, not just here in the U.S., but throughout the world.
So last question, we'll open up to the group. So for somebody who may want to get involved in the storytelling business that you're in, what would be your recommendation to them?
So I'm a hardcore journalist, and I flip between telling news stories and documentary stories. And so when I work with my documentary people who've never done news or journalism, we kind of battle heads because I think it's really important to have good, solid integrity and learn about the history of journalism in this country. And so I always tell if you want to, students, even if you're going back for your second career, get a good, solid journalism education. While people in my level of my career, notice I didn't say my age, people in my level of my career, we've been sort of in a panic mode as we see news organizations, if not shutting down, they're being gobbled up by just a few networks. But the upside, or a few owners, the upside is, well, especially the young people, you know all about the digital platform. Oh my gosh. You have a platform to tell your story, to tell other people's story. So I would say get educated about the history of journalism, get journalism as a foundation, and then go out there and start telling stories. Go out there. If that's your passion, you can do it. It won't be the same route that I took. It won't be the same route that Ed Bradley took, one of my mentors who took me under his wing. Formerly, he's passed away now, from 60 Minutes. It'll be a different path. But if you want to go out there and tell stories, go out there with integrity and do it. Honor the people that you're telling the stories. It's tricky. You want to talk to people who are in the suffering state, but there's a compassionate way to do it. And just put yourself in their shoes before you start asking them questions.
Okay, what questions do all of you have? Yes, Nicole.
What do you think the biggest lie and probably the most important truth out there is right now in journalism?
What do you think the biggest lie or the most important truth may be out there in the world right now that should be shared by journalists? Is that where we're going with it?
Well, just in your industry, what do you personally feel is the biggest lie out there?
In your industry, what do you believe is the biggest lie out there right now?
Well, the first time I heard your question, I took it a different way. So I'll take it that way, and then I'll take it the other way. So the way I first took it is that the perception of journalists, like what is the biggest lie about? And I think the perception is that the journalists don't care, that they just want to get the story, that they just want to get the ratings. And while there are people out there who do that, and we do have to keep the lights on and pay the bills, I was saying earlier that it used to be the priorities were in journalism, whether it's TV or print, number one, get the facts straight. Number two, tell a good story. Number three, we got to pay the bills. Now that's shifted. We're going to pay the bills. We're going to be the first one. We won't be, if we're inaccurate, we'll get that out there later. And sadly, that is driving news right now. And so you didn't ask for my advice, but I will give it. When people say, well, then what do you do? How can you know what's truth? And so we're used to reading vertically, right? Here's the page, beginning to end. I challenge people to read horizontally. And what I mean by that is sort of stack up, if not physically, mentally, figuratively, stack up your newspapers or news broadcast stations side by side and see what the real story is. The other, I'm going to go back to independent journalism. The Colorado Independent, people who are not getting their paychecks paid by big corporations. The biggest lie in the news world right now, wow.
This is recorded, by the way.
Okay.
Just to remind you.
Okay. I think one of the biggest, I'll say, problems that we all should be aware of, regardless of what you think is happening in the White House, we're not paying attention to the issues. And that's not to say that when the President of the United States tweets something that is inappropriate, I'm not saying we don't report on that, but that can't be where we stop. We have to get to the real story. So I don't know if it's a lie out there so much as it is we're letting blank stuff go down and we're not paying attention. And I say we, meaning journalists, but I also mean the consumer. Because if you think about it, where we all are is partly because of the consumer has asked for this. Now, I'm not taking any blame away from journalism, but it's just like, remember when everybody had a Humvee and big Tahoe? I mean, everybody. And then gas prices went up to nearly $4 an hour, $4 a gallon. And the consumer said, you know what? I'm not going to pay for that. Where can I get a Prius? Where can I get a good economy, gas-efficient car? So the consumer drove that conversation. The consumer, those who are consuming news, can drive this conversation more. Pick up the phone and say, you know what? I was there when that happened, or I don't think that that's true. Send an email. You can make your voice heard. And if you're feeling that lies are out there, then make sure you make your voice heard, because at the end of the day, the organizations do have to listen.
What are the questions we have? Yes?
Can you speak a little bit about your experience just being a woman in journalism, particularly conflict reporting?
So please speak about your experience as a woman in journalism, specifically conflict reporting.
Thank you for that question, because let me tell you, it is still a good old boys club. But to be fair, the risks are different for women. And so I'm very conscientious about that when I'm working with a crew and a team or my fixers, because if I put myself in a bad situation, unwittingly or carelessly, then I'm putting my team in a bad situation. I literally keep my head on a swivel, my antenna has always been really good, but particularly when I'm in a hotel room someplace or in a tent, and there's no real lock, no security. I've got my shoes by my bed or by my sleeping bag. I don't sleep in pajamas. I sleep in sweats, so that if I've got to put my shoes on and get the hell out of there or beat somebody up, I'm ready to go. But the upside about being a woman in journalism, and maybe this is true in other industries, is that you bring a different perspective. Speaking to women in Baghdad, in this bombed-out neighborhood that looked just crazy. The men are gone. They're dead, or they're trying to serve, and they're pulling it together. And for them to sit across the table from me, I think I bring something different to that conversation.
What are the questions? There's one over here. Anyone else? Yep, back there, Kyle. What are your thoughts regarding fake news? That's an easy, slow, soft pitch there. What are your thoughts regarding fake news? Let's do that.
So the latest fake news I heard was something on the Broncos. What was that? They were going to get rid of somebody, and they were calling it fake news. I'm like, that's not really fake news. So it's not anything new, but what is different is that, and I'm not blaming social media. Social media has saved lives and propelled us into a space where it's just been phenomenal. But because that piece of information could just travel without any kind of filter, that's what's creating the problem. It's not so much fake news, because I think after a while we get the chance to think about it, read about it, and go, okay, that was fake news. But so it's been happening for a while. But again, since we have so many channels to tell a fake news story, that it just when we say it goes viral, it's viral. And the problem is, who's going to go back and say, wait, I better check that fact? Or do I remember 2 days ago that was reported the other way? So it's, again, back to us to sort of go, let's just think about this. Does that answer your question? What I really think about fake news is it sucks, I guess, is the way I could put it.
Yes, got a question right here?
Yeah, how do you combat journalism? Journalism being reporters, journalists reading 3 or 4 stories and then drawing your own conclusions for that and putting that out as the story.
How do you combat journalism when people read several stories and try to make it into their own story going forward? Did I get that right? Kind of close? You understood what he said.
When journalists do that?
When journalists do that.
When journalists do that, yeah, so I would fire them if I ruled the world. And this is the problem with, this is a great time and space to be again, but we can't just rely on the here and now. We have to dig deeper. And so how do I feel about that? I think it's lazy. I think it's almost sinful, because we have a responsibility to tell the truth. In many news organizations that I freelance for, from BBC, Al Jazeera America, PBS, I'm constantly asked by the producer, the executive producer, is this original reporting? In other words, I never forget, I was covering, sadly, another one of the school shootings. Was it Deerfield? And I'm on the phone to New York saying, the sheriff is saying blah, 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 blah. And rightly so. The producer's like, now, is that original reporting? I'm like, yeah, the sheriff's standing right here. Meaning, am I hearing it from someone else and regurgitating it? Or am I actually rolling my sleeves up and getting my hands dirty and getting the story? So I don't know if that answers your question, but you're right. It does happen where some people just kind of take a few stories and then make up their own, and that's bad. If I ruled the world, they would not be a journalist. I also want to make sure that we distinguish, we all know the difference between working reporters and columnists and opinion people and analysts, right? Those are different animals.
Okay. Is there one last question? Yes, David.
Before the event, you touched a little bit on sort of a historical figure who wasn't alive that you would have, if you could have interviewed, that would have been really cool, and what you would ask. I just love your perspective on that, if you would share that. Great.
So before the event and our gathering, you shared your thoughts on a historical figure that you may wish to interview, right, or spend time with. Would you share those, please?
And the person I said I would want to interview would be Dr. Martin Luther King. And like people are, yeah, everybody would want to interview him. But no, I really would, I'd really like to sit down with him and say, given what's happening right now, how do you, of all people who always has, taking the higher road and thinking the goodness of people, how do you make sense of what's going on today? I want to sit down with him and say, and then what? Do we march? I love to march. And I think there's value in marching. But I think we're at a space where we can go even further. And I'm not entirely sure what that is. And I think he could help shape that. And maybe that next step is policy. But I would love to see what Dr. King would have to say. And I love the fact that while he was this extraordinary individual and got people from all walks of life to come together and if not march, but just come to church, come to a meeting, sit at the table, so on and so forth, he also wasn't perfect. I mean, he wasn't the best husband and he wasn't the best father. But I think that's awesome to me in the sense that gives all of us permission to be not perfect. That's not what it's about. Heroes aren't perfect. Heroes are just the people that stand up and do something when risk is involved.